News ahead.
Well, joining me this morning, Mike Indian, political journalist and commentator with a splendid hat on, and Lettice Bromovsky, journalist at the Mail Online. Good morning. Happy Christmas.
Morning.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, well, it kind of all merged.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Christmas till the 6th of January, at least.
Yes, so it's 12th night tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I've got to take the tree down.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what to do with the tree either. Where does one take the tree?
Oh, well, it depends if one has a real tree or not a real tree.
I got a real tree.
You can recycle them.
Oh, well, then I'll be doing that.
I think you'll find the local councils take trees.
I've got to look into that because I can't be having the bad luck that comes after that.
Well, quite. Talking of bad luck, shall we just look at those headlines this morning? I mean, honestly, Starmer being attacked from all sides. So we've got Elon Musk jumping in. We've got Donald Trump coming in saying net zero is an absolute nonsense, 2030. Drill, baby, drill. Elon Musk says Starmer was complicit in the rape of Britain. Maggie Oliver now as well coming into this and talking about the grooming gangs, these rape gangs. Maybe I'll start there, actually. How much trouble is he in?
It really depends on how quick he's going to implement the recommendations of the J review that landed on the government's desks only 3 years ago now, nearly 3 years ago. The three key recommendations for that: mandatory reporting, new child protection agency, and a national redress scheme. Nearly 3 years later, none of these have been implemented yet.
Why?
There is a Children and Wellbeing Bill before Parliament. If the government doesn't put these amendments down, I blame the Sunak government for not acting quickly enough on this. If this bill isn't amended to bring these recommendations in, those key three at least, on Monday, then the government really is in trouble, I would say, on this issue.
And just in terms of that, I mean, this has taken... I mean, many of our listeners and viewers are absolutely horrified, as am I, as to what happened.
Yeah.
And the level of dishonesty, I think, is the right word to use. And reading these horrific stories of 13-year-old girls who went to the police, said this is what had happened to them, weren't believed, were told to go away until they weren't drunk, then they were raped again on the in the car on the way home. And I don't understand how, A, that's been allowed to happen in this country, but also what went on. And when you look at Keir Starmer's response, this is in 2012, and I know I keep going on about it, but just in terms of his response, it's word salad. We shouldn't shy away from it. It's an approach to the victims, the credibility issue that caused these cases not to be prosecuted in the past. There was a lack of understanding. No, there wasn't. There wasn't a lack of understanding. There was a lack of due diligence.
And I think that's why people are so outraged by this, so up in arms, is that there was failings across almost every institution that should have been there to protect these very young, very vulnerable girls, and yet they were failed time and time and again. And I think that's why there's even more outrage now that when calling for the public inquiry, Jess Phillips has said, no, we're not going to do this, it should be down to a local level.
So that's really interesting. The fact is it died down, didn't it? And
it died down.
And Jess Phillips, who has said there won't be a public inquiry, then you've got Elon Musk saying she's covering for her boss.
Now,
go on.
I was going to say, in terms of Elon Musk getting involved in this, on the whole, I largely think it's unhelpful for him to be getting involved on X, writing things that are, you know, very sort of, well, not quite slanderous, but they're very out there, they're rude, almost a smear campaign and attacking these people. I think that it's sort of a sign of what we're going to see in the future from America, constantly getting involved in British politics. And as you said on the front page of the Times, again with Trump attacking the windfall tax rises that we've got in this country as well. You've sort of got to remember as well that Trump back in 2017 lost an appeal up in Scotland on his golf course to not have these wind farms near his golf course or in view. So he's also got a bit of a personal vendetta going on.
Take the windmills down.
So of course he's going to be, you know, shouting out against this.
Just in terms of Jess Phillips and saying there shouldn't be a public inquiry, all the fingers are essentially saying you are covering for your boss. I think what the public want is they want answers. Who knew what? When did they know it? Why was nothing done about it? And what can we learn from it? And that's what they want now.
Look, a cathartic exercise to bring stuff to light in lieu of these horrible crimes is entirely understandable. The government is still on the hook for the previous inquiry and implementing those recommendations. I don't want to see another inquiry. No. We saw on Friday and the Social Care Commission kicking reform for that into the long grass. I'm getting sick to death of Labour commissioning reviews, inquiries, independent assessments of things
Royal Commission
as well. No, Royal Commissions are the ultimate kick into the long grass. What we need is for them to look at what's on the desk in front of them, the stuff that the Sunak government pledged it would legislate on. Let's look, for example, at the Child Protection Agency. Lettice is entirely right that the bodies involved in that are not up to scratch. The CQC is undergoing its own assessment at the moment. We need extra measures to protect children now, not another 7 years down the line. That is what the victims need to give them justice. If there are further failings that Keir Starmer had, why has it taken this long for them to come out as well? It certainly is not the job of Elon Musk to expose these. It's the job of the British government to legislate for them now.
In some ways, I welcome the sunlight on this, because I do think we need to know exactly what was going on. But also the fact that in 2012 he gave that word salad statement. I think it's coming back to bite him.
Well, yeah, he's Prime Minister now, and the buck stops with him. In 2012, he was in charge of the prosecutions of those 95 men that were sent to prison. Those men that were sent to prison for a total of 95 years for those horrible crimes. Now he's in charge of ensuring the criminal justice system in this country effectively delivers redress. And even those 3 recommendations out of the 20, the key ones that were there, national redress, child protection agency, mandatory reporting, have not been implemented. Labour has this huge majority. For God's sake, use it. Implement, legislate for these measures on Monday, get those amendments down, the Child and Wellbeing Bill.
So we've talked about the grooming gangs, the rape gangs. The fact is, you've talked about the fact that he needs to implement those findings. I actually think he needs to come out and publicly address all of this. And of course, you've talked about Donald Trump and Peter Mandelson, of course, trying to stop any tariffs being levied on this country. So he's got lots of problems. But closer to home, 20 councillors have quit Labour in protest at the party's direction under Keir Starmer. This is Broxtowe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire claimed the party has abandoned traditional Labour values. This is Milan Radulovic. He's been a member for 42 years. They're establishing a new independent party. So the reason for this is they question the winter fuel payment, which you would have thought is a traditional Labour value. And of course, that was their first policy, to remove that. This is not a good look for Labour at all.
No, and it sort of speaks to the wider problems that we've been discussing today, this sort of disillusionment that's been going on within the Labour parties. Polls have recently been showing their drop in popularity, a lack of trust to run the economy. And on the winter fuel payment, it was very shocking when it came out. It wasn't part of the manifesto pledge that they originally were putting in when they were running the general election. It sort of came out of nowhere. And now we've seen the sort of shock knock-on effects of it this winter, when people have really been struggling to pay their bills, coupled it with the energy price cap which came into place. So energy bills were rising. Again, people are just struggling out there, and the oldest people to be hit the hardest at such tough time. It's a very bad look. In terms of PR-wise and communications-wise, it's not a good image.
But it looks like it's a very uncaring government.
Yeah.
Fine, let elderly people die.
And when they were looking at it, they were clearly just looking at the numbers and where they could save money, and they thought, oh, this will be easy, we can save a couple million here. But it's had disastrous effects on them, and I'm surprised they haven't wheeled it back in some way, but they've stood strong with it through these months, and now again they're losing councillors because of it. They're losing their 42-year loyalist Labour.
It really is quite something.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
For councillors to go just into. We've talked about the winter fuel allowance to death, but then you've got Wes Streeting in a really crass interview saying now is the time to turn the heating on. We've heard from lots of older people who are so frightened that they can't actually afford to put the heating on. They may have missed out on the winter fuel payment by, a few pounds or whatever because of the threshold. We're seeing people who are coming into A&E with burns because they're sitting next to a 1-bar electric fire because they're so cold. And for Wes Streeting to say turn the heating on, it's not that straightforward.
If the government's best communicator is dropping a clanger like that at the crunch point, then you know that their comm strategy is in trouble here. But this is going to be the proof is in the pudding for this policy, because when the figures come out for deaths due to cold, and particularly for the elderly people for this winter, you can't sit here and defend this policy when the temperatures outside are as they are. It was very poorly communicated. It was poorly thought out in that way. I think actually in terms of the actual outsized influence of it as well, they could have done something probably far more reaching and probably far less damaging to the government and people's lives.
But Lettice's point is actually valid. It's the optics of this more than anything. Fine. Yeah. OK, there are older people who don't need the 300 quid, but actually it's the optics.
I think at the moment we need to focus on the practicalities, that there will be people listening to this who know somebody who doesn't feel they can put their heating on. And that is, at the moment, what's first and foremost in my mind at this point in time. The amount of money saved from this was paltry. I think in terms of, they could justify it in the public finances if they'd done something bigger on welfare spending than just this. This feels like an unnecessary totem unacceptable. It wasn't explained and pitchforked. They've made their bed on this a long time ago. They'll have to deal with it for the rest of the year, probably for the rest of this Parliament in some way, shape or form.
I mean, Mike mentions advisors. I do wonder who's advising them, because, of course, they frankly have lied to the electorate on multiple occasions, and people voted for Labour based on a set of promises which they haven't fulfilled.
No, exactly. And they really haven't. There have been so many little missteps they've gone back on, whether that's with the WASPy women, a policy that they very much supported outright, publicly on Twitter.
Photo shoots saying we support the WASPy women.
And then going back on it. I mean, it's a very bad look for them. I think in some ways, and actually it's very easy when you're out of power to agree with these policies that you don't actually then have to implement. But I think there should be some repercussions for all governments, that is, for all parties. You cannot go around misleading.
How would you do that? Would you make it legally binding, so your manifesto becomes a contract?
Or you give out fines to parties who go back, or something like that, you know, some sort of policy that will make people think twice about simply saying things so you can look like the good person and not the villain.
OK, well, it's just interesting, and I know Mike will have some very strong opinions on this. Let's look at the MRP poll. This has been carried out by Stonehaven. I know we're miles away from an election before you tell me that. Labour down 133 members of Parliament to 278. Conservatives up 36 to 157. Reform up 115 to 120 members of Parliament. Lib Dems at 47. Down. That's quite interesting. Down 25. Your reading?
I think it's fascinating, but also not that surprising. When we look back at the general election, the way that Labour won was not through being inspired by their policies. It was through a love lost for the Conservative Party. People just wanted them out, and so people voted for Labour. So now, really, those voters, they're not loyal to Labour, and they're looking for what might be the next best option. And for some people, now that is to be seen as reform. But also, when you look at where reform came second across these constituencies, there was 98 constituencies they came second in. 89 of them were won by Labour, and often those majorities weren't that massive. So it wouldn't take that much to really push it over the edge and give it to the second place, which in many cases is reform.
Mike.
Reform polled second place in 100 seats across the country, both Labour and Tory, particularly for Labour in the red wall seats as well. Those majorities have been successively falling since 2017. 2019 they were down, 2024 they were also down as well. What this really depends on also, what this doesn't factor in, is how Reform organises itself as a national but also a local force in the next 4 to 5 years. Because the reason the Lib Dems did so well on an equivalent share of the vote is that their local campaign ground game is just much better than the other parties.
But they're much older. Yeah, I see,
also so if Reform could... So, yes, if Elon Musk makes this much wanted donation to Reform, I think if they put it into...
Do you believe he would give cash?
I don't know, but I think...
I do. I really do.
But you also need councillors on the ground, you also need activists on the ground, and you need to know where you can win, because we saw this in previous elections with UKIP in 2015, with the last election with Reform. They were capped by the fact that their support was nationally spread but not locally concentrated. The Lib Dems showed them how to win those seats. So this also depends on party organisation as well.